In a landmark 6-3 ruling, the Supreme Court has struck down former President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff plan, sending shockwaves through the nation's political and economic landscape. This decision marks a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate over presidential authority and the limits of executive power. The court's decision dismantles a central pillar of Trump's economic policy, declaring that he overstepped his legal authority by imposing broad tariffs without explicit congressional approval. For years, these tariffs were a cornerstone of his America First agenda, aimed at protecting domestic industries but often criticized for sparking trade wars and raising prices. Trump's response was immediate and furious. He called the ruling a betrayal of American workers, accusing the court of undermining national security and vowing political retaliation against those he sees as responsible. His supporters echoed his outrage, while critics argued the decision was long overdue. This is more than a legal ruling. It's a political earthquake with global implications. The decision has ignited fierce debate in Washington and beyond, with lawmakers, economists, and world leaders all weighing in on what this means for the future of U.S. trade policy. For years, these tariffs fueled economic disruption and international tension, raising costs for businesses and consumers alike. American manufacturers struggled with higher input prices, while farmers faced retaliatory tariffs from trading partners. Small businesses, already squeezed by inflation, found it harder to compete. The court's decision ends this contentious chapter, but it also opens a new era of uncertainty for American trade. With the legal foundation for unilateral tariffs now in question, future presidents may find their hands tied, and Congress may be forced to take a more active role in shaping trade policy. The justices have redrawn the boundaries of presidential power, setting a precedent that will echo through future administrations. Legal scholars say this ruling could reshape how presidents use emergency powers, not just in trade, but across a range of policy areas. At its core, this case was about the balance of power in government. Can a president unilaterally reshape trade policy using emergency powers? The Supreme Court has answered, no. The ruling reaffirms the principle that major economic decisions require checks and balances, and that Congress, not the president alone, holds the power to regulate trade. As the fallout begins, global markets and political alliances are already shifting. Investors are recalibrating their strategies, and America's trading partners are reassessing their relationships with Washington, uncertain about what comes next. The story of Trump's tariffs has reached its dramatic climax, but the consequences are just beginning to unfold. The Supreme Court's decision will shape America's economic future, redefine presidential power, and leave a lasting mark on the nation's place in the world. To truly grasp the Supreme Court's decision on the matter, it's important to first understand the broader context and motivations behind the tariffs themselves. We need to revisit the core of Trump's America First agenda, a policy platform that promised to put American workers, industries, and interests above all else, especially in the global marketplace. Tariffs became his primary weapon to counter what he described as decades of unfair foreign competition, particularly from China, but also from other major trading partners. Trump argued that previous administrations had allowed American manufacturing to decline, jobs to be shipped overseas, and the U.S. to become dependent on foreign goods. The legal foundation for these sweeping actions was the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. This law gives presidents broad authority to regulate commerce during a declared national emergency, allowing them to restrict or block certain economic transactions with foreign entities. Trump invoked this power by declaring a national emergency, targeting hundreds of billions of dollars in imports from China, and even extending tariffs to goods from U.S. allies like the European Union, Canada, and Mexico. The administration claimed this was necessary to protect national security and restore economic balance. Critics, however, argued that this move stretched the law's original intent. They pointed out that trade disputes, no matter how serious, don't typically qualify as true national emergencies, and warned that using emergency powers in this way set a dangerous precedent. The tariffs affected a vast array of products, from steel and aluminum to everyday consumer goods. The goal was to boost domestic industry, encourage companies to bring jobs back to the U.S., and pressure trading partners to negotiate fairer deals. But the policy sparked fierce opposition both at home and abroad, with many industries and trading partners pushing back. Economists and business leaders warned that tariffs would ultimately raise costs for American businesses and consumers, disrupt supply chains, and provoke retaliation from other countries. Small businesses in particular feared they would be squeezed by higher prices and lost export markets. All of this set the stage for a prolonged and costly trade war, escalating tensions with major trading partners and leading to a complex legal battle that would eventually reach the Supreme Court. The legal challenge came from small businesses and importers, not political heavyweights. In VOS Elections v. Trump, they argued the president had exceeded his authority under IEPA. Their case: IEPA was never meant to wage a trade war, but to address specific threats like terrorism or hostile regimes. The lawsuit highlighted real-world harm, businesses crippled by sudden costs, layoffs, and uncertainty. As the case advanced, it became a national debate about the limits of presidential power. Support came from free market advocates and civil liberties groups, making it a test of the separation of powers. The plaintiffs fought not just for their businesses, but for a principle at the heart of American democracy. While legal battles raged in the background, the real impact of tariffs was felt every day by ordinary Americans. At grocery stores, checkout counters, and shopping malls, people began to notice their dollars didn't stretch as far as they used to. The cost of living crept up, and families found themselves making tough choices about what to buy and what to leave behind. Tariffs raised prices on everyday goods: bicycles, furniture, electronics, and even basic household items, putting extra pressure on family budgets. For many, these weren't just minor inconveniences. They meant real sacrifices, like cutting back on essentials or postponing important purchases. The ripple effect was felt in every aisle and at every register. The policy's goal was to protect U.S. industries and encourage buying American-made products. However, the results were mixed and often unpredictable. While some factories saw a brief uptick in demand, others struggled to adapt to higher costs for imported parts and materials. Many businesses that relied on imported materials saw their costs soar, making it harder to compete both at home and abroad. Some were forced to raise prices, while others had no choice but to lay off workers or even shut down entirely. The uncertainty left business owners and employees anxious about the future. Retaliation from other countries hit American farmers especially hard. As foreign markets closed their doors to U.S. crops, exports plummeted and farm incomes dropped sharply. Many rural communities faced mounting debts and the painful prospect of losing family farms that had been passed down for generations. The interconnected nature of the global economy meant that tariffs on one sector quickly rippled across many others. Supply chains were disrupted, shipping costs increased, and businesses large and small struggled to keep up with the changes. Economic studies consistently found that the costs of tariffs outweighed their intended benefits. Instead of boosting growth, they reduced economic output and led to significant job losses in multiple industries. The data painted a sobering picture of unintended consequences. The fallout from these policies became a central issue in public debate. Protests erupted, town hall meetings grew heated, and news coverage highlighted the growing sense of urgency for a legal challenge to the tariffs. For many Americans, the Supreme Court case represented a crucial opportunity to end a policy that was hurting their livelihoods and threatening their financial security. The stakes felt personal and immediate. The economic pain was real, not just theoretical. Families struggled to pay bills, keep up with rising expenses, and plan for the future amid so much uncertainty. When the ruling finally came, it brought hope for relief to millions of Americans. For many, it was a sign that change was possible, and that their voices had finally been heard. At the heart of the Supreme Court case was the question, how far can presidential power go? The Trump administration claimed IEPA gave the president broad authority to impose tariffs in a national emergency. Challengers argued Congress never intended to hand over such sweeping power, especially to create new tax schemes. The Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to tax and regulate commerce. The Supreme Court examined IEPA's history, finding it was meant to limit, not expand, emergency powers. The justices concluded the administration's use of IEPA went too far. Their decision reaffirmed that even in emergencies, the president's power has limits. The ruling was a powerful statement about the separation of powers. The president, the court made clear, is not above the law. Central to the court's decision was the major questions doctrine. This principle says that actions of vast economic and political significance require clear authorization from Congress. The Trump tariffs, affecting hundreds of billions in trade, were undeniably major. The court found IEPA's language too vague to justify such sweeping action. Applying the doctrine to presidential power in foreign policy was a bold step, signaling new limits on executive authority. This strengthens Congress's role and demands clear legislative mandates for big policy shifts. Critics say the doctrine gives judges too much power, but it's now a key check on the executive. The tariff case cements its place in Supreme Court history. The message: presidents need explicit approval for major moves. The case's journey to the Supreme Court was fraught with legal debate. The U.S. Court of International Trade first ruled against the tariffs, but its reasoning was criticized as weak. The lower court tried to avoid a constitutional ruling by narrowly interpreting IEPA. Critics argued this approach twisted the law and set a confusing precedent. On appeal, the government insisted the president needed broad flexibility, while plaintiffs maintained he'd overreached. The Supreme Court took a different approach, grounding its decision in the major questions doctrine. This provided a stronger, more principled resolution. The High Court's ruling addressed the core constitutional issue, not just statutory interpretation. Beneath the legal arguments was a deeper constitutional issue: the loss of the legislative veto. Congress once used this tool to check presidential emergency powers, but the Supreme Court struck it down in 1983. Without it, presidents gained sweeping authority under laws like IEPA, with little oversight. The Trump tariffs exposed this imbalance, one person imposing massive trade policy unilaterally. The court's decision uses the major questions doctrine as a new check, demanding clarity from Congress. It's a pushback against unchecked executive power, and a call for Congress to reclaim its role. The ruling forces a national rethink on how emergency powers are delegated and controlled. The Supreme Court's decision marks a turning point for U.S. trade policy and global relations. By ending the tariffs, the court signals that unilateral trade actions under emergency powers won't stand. This could ease trade tensions, especially with China, and restore stability for businesses. Future presidents will need explicit congressional approval for sweeping tariffs, shifting power back to the legislature. The ruling may help rebuild America's reputation as a reliable global partner. It's a course correction, showing the resilience of checks and balances. The Trump tariffs case will be remembered as a pivotal moment in defining presidential limits. Its impact will ripple through American politics, economics, and global alliances for years to come.